Our next speaker is sort of the biological teacher of our organization, the one that's always pushing up against the boundaries and exploring the far corners of what nature can do. And he's taught me quite a lot. And I learned very early on that he has his own style and pace of teaching. I don't know if you call it slow learning or not, but there's a lot of different pieces, and Jim will use a lot of visuals and stories to tell you different aspects, and you'll see how it all gets woven together into a very powerful vision for what we could have in the future. So it's my honor to welcome Jim.
All right. Okay, I'm going to do a semester course in 30 minutes. But the idea is like what Philip alluded to, and I liked Adam's speech too. How'd you like that? That was quite a lot of what happened here today is my fault, so if there's something to find fault with, come to me. But I'll kind of start the story. Look at these continents here. There's Asia, and it's kind of gelatinous. This is Judy Schwartz's new book, Water in Plain Sight. Imagine the continents being hydrated, rehydrated. We're in an era of desiccation right now. We used to be in the ice age, but now we're in the desiccation age. We're drying the continents out. But this is the image that I'm trying to shoot for, is how do we get back to something wet? Probably the favorite thing I do every week is every Thursday the homeschoolers show up at my house, and we do biology, or we do chemistry, or we do astrophysics, or whatever it is. They've been with me for 3 years now. Most of them have passed their AP biology tests, their AP environmental science, and now they're juniors now. But Rachel Carson taught us a lot about invertebrates in the Gulf of Maine, and gave me a whole way of looking at it. And I think when they spoke at Harvard, they kind of changed what I thought about the oceans. We had an oceans conference. I never thought our organization would go that direction. I'm really glad that we did. But when they gave that talk about the oceans, they were trying to figure out where did the water from the oceans come from. And it kind of focused around Halley's Comet, because we thought a lot of the water must have come from comets at one time, and or meteors. But what got me when they were speaking was this picture. Look at those CO2 numbers. Okay? 1759, the CO2 was about 278. Went up to 283, well, that's not a big deal. 298, well, maybe that's not a big deal. Look what happened in 1986 and how much that went up. And so I got curious and I thought, what is it going to be when they see Halley's Comet? They've all agreed to meet in 2061 and be there. They'll be in their 60s, where a lot of us are now. And what kind of world would it be like? And you see 515. And the next Halley's Comet would be 702. This is just business as usual. So try to imagine what that world would be like. And it really scared me. I mean, I was kind of in tears that day. These are the last 5 years, about 2.5 parts per million per year. And I was kind of in tears this day because I'm becoming aware of something that I'm going to put on you that I wasn't sure I was going to do. The East Siberian shelf is very shallow, and it's now been uncovered by the ice doesn't cover it anymore. And this is a methane. It's showing the methane that's coming out of the ocean in various places. And notice how the East Siberian shelf is dwarfing everybody else. 20 years ago, there was nothing coming out of that shelf because it was covered by ice. This is why I get scared about the future. And so I thought, well, what is my goal? My goal is to go to 300. And it's interesting because humans could work with nature and make that happen faster rather than slower. And so I thought, well, why don't I invite some of my biodiverse friends? I usually think that if you can listen to nature and see what it's trying to tell you, you'll learn a lot faster. So let's do a magic trick here. Let's go to video. And let's hear a guy talking a little bit about fungi. It's really neat. We've got Chris Nichols here today. So
longer use. So soil is full of life, but surprisingly, despite the fact it's full of life, we've never viewed soil as an ecosystem. So that's, to me, a little bit about trying to understand how to save the orangutan without paying any attention to the rainforest. So the first thing we did, I'm a very keen fan of the TV show ER, and whenever anything goes wrong in ER, they take it to a CT machine, and that's exactly what we did with our soil. This is the first time that anybody has ever visualized the soil habitat. It's a high-resolution micro CT image of soil. These structures, the pore spaces you're looking at here, are about a third as thick as a human hair. And this is where the microorganisms live in soil. Now, the astonishing thing, when we looked at this and we did some clever stuff with mathematics and figured out that the structure of this habitat is not random. The fact that we can fly through it like this, the fact that this pore space is all connected, means that something is organizing soil at the scale of the microorganism. So we tried to figure out what that might be. And not surprisingly, perhaps, we found out that it's the microorganisms themselves that are organizing soil. And we did some clever computing and mathematical modeling, and this is an example of one of these models where we looked at how microbes distribute themselves in the habitat space. And what we found was that where the particular site in soil is a really good place for microbes to live, they cover the surface like this. This is a fungal mycelium, it covers the surface, and this protects those habitats from being degraded. Where the sites are not so good, that doesn't happen, and those sites get degraded. So over time, the best sites win over the bad sites, and soil is continually in a state of self-improval through this interaction between microbes and structure. So where does the energy come for all of this? All of this reorganization, moving stuff around, takes energy. Well, the energy comes from the sun, but because soil is a dark place, it comes from the sun via plants. Plants catch carbon. Carbon flows through the plant. Around 20% of that carbon goes out through the roots into the soil and feeds the microbes. The microbes get their energy. They need to do all this great stuff to make soil do all the stuff that we depend on to do from carbon. And all we need to do is find ways of getting carbon from the atmosphere, where there's too much of it anyway, back into the soil, where we've been steadily removing it for the last 50 years or more.
Okay, now think about if you're fungi and you're down there trying to construct these systems, you depend on air to breathe, so you have to have a way to breathe down there, and you're going down several feet, and then all of a sudden we add a lot of chemical nitrogen, and the bacterial populations go like crazy, and the whole network gets consumed by bacteria. So we've lost our fungal network, and we can't get nutrients from deep in the soil. So think about that, and try to imagine yourself being a fungal network, the intelligence of the planet. You know, it's like brain tissue. So that's the first film. Now imagine you're trying to slow the water down and hydrate the continents. This guy's a little bit furrier, so maybe he'll be more easy to connect with.
Beavers are vegetarians. They gnaw through bark to eat the sugary layer underneath. They've been gnawing through forests for 20 million years. Felling trees with your teeth takes great strength, skill, and patience. One technique is to slice halfway through and let the wind do the rest. The beaver's incisors are strengthened with iron, which makes them orange. They grow continuously and even self-sharpen. The pond makes it easier to move around the heavy logs they need to build their dams. Out of the water, it's a struggle. Stones help weigh down the base. The whole family works together, carefully interlocking the timber. They dredge mud from the pond bottom to seal the dam. Each pond traps several inches of sediment every year, so there's plenty of it. The young act as apprentice builders, learning the tricks of the trade. The final results are impressive. In the Rocky Mountains, beaver dams slowly filter billions of tons of water. The ponds build up soil and nutrients and help prevent floods and droughts.
So there were once probably 100 million beaver on the continent of North America, maybe 300 million. We don't really know. Right now we know there's somewhere between 6 and 12 million. We wonder why we're drying out. So this is another possibility, and we'll talk more about that. But then the kids and I, when we were learning about the oceans, I've got one kid that's really big on shellfish, very concerned about ocean acidification. Young mussels and clams and oysters have a very hard time making shells as the acidity gets tougher, which is a CO2 problem. So Rachel Carson taught us a lot about that with the Edge of the Sea. And then we found this video of an area where it has not been trawled in 20 years off the coast of Maine, so, you know, and we were just kind of startled by this. Now notice all the stuff flying around. That's larvae of everything in the ocean puts out lots and lots of eggs and larvae and whatever, and everybody eats it. You know, filter feeders are really critical, but hardly anybody. I call it the planktonic snow. This is a healthy system. So just to point that out. Now, what impressed me about this was the bottom. Because of that planktonic snow, there's eggs that are attaching to every open space of rock. If there's any piece of real estate that they can grab onto, you know, a square centimeter, square millimeter, that'll pretty soon it'll be an attached mussel or clam or something. And that's the way it used to look. Now imagine what happens when you trawl an area like this. You lose half of it the first time they do it. You lose all of it, you know, the third time they do it. So think about that a little bit. Now we'll come back to reality here. This was kind of like going to church to me. It's good, it's Sunday morning, you know. This is your world. And so how are we doing? Hank, how are we doing?
13 minutes.
13 minutes, okay. This is what's going on right now. We know a couple numbers. We know we're burning about 10 billion tons, 10 gigatons of carbon every year. And we know that the atmosphere is increasing by about 2.5 parts per million per year. Well, that's about 5 gigatons. It's real neat, you can do the conversions. 1 ppm atmospheric carbon dioxide contains 2 gigatons of carbon. So that's just a ballpark number to work with. So if we're getting 10, we're burning up, and it's only increasing by 5 gigatons a year, the other 5 gigatons has to be going somewhere. It's either going to the oceans or it's going to the land. We're not real sure, but what we do know is because the oceans are warming up, it's getting harder for them to absorb, and we don't want them to absorb much more anyway because it's becoming too acidic. We want to slow that down. So when I was thinking about how do we build a future for the kids that they could live into and feel proud of and whatever, I thought, why don't we try for something like this? We've got, notice that here we've got, I haven't reduced the fossil fuels. Now the fossil fuel people can cut that in half. Wow, that would be huge. But I haven't assumed that. Let's say, well, let's work with it how it is. But look at the oceans over there. What if we started bubbling out the CO2 and let it go back to more alkaline so that the shellfish can work better? Well, now we've got to, and then we've got to reduce the atmosphere by 10 parts per million, or 5 parts per million, so we got to, you know, got to have a negative 10 in the middle there. And so the big number that counts is this minus 25. Could the ecosystems of the land take out 25 gigatons in a year? If we could do that, that's a 5 part per million difference. How long would it take us to learn how to do that? So I built a scenario. A scenario is, you know, trying to figure out, is this feasible? Is this possible? Adam's team is already working on putting the compendium together, so we've got the data. But this is the way I think about it. And I thought, well, what if we had a roadmap to 300, and we started looking at the people that were doing good work, and if we extended that out to include all the land that we've got available. The grasslands, we've learned a lot about grasslands from Alan Savory. And Alan says there's 12 billion acres of degraded grasslands, a lot of it which we now call desert. But if grazing animals got back on that land, and you were pooping on the land instead of in CAFOs and, you know, combined agriculture feedlots, you could probably put down a ton of carbon per acre at a minimum. This is keeping the animals moving and so forth. So that's 10 billion tons. That's not 25 billion a year, but that's a start. Well, now look what's happening. We've got farming can be done in a way that can actually do more than that, because that's usually done in wetter climates. You know, like I've got this map here in the United States. How many people know about the 100th meridian? In Texas, this is a big deal. If you go this way, you get less than 20 inches of rain a year. If you go this way, you get more. So I just thought it's a ballpark number. Why don't we say, let's try for, in these brittle lands, as Alan Savory would talk about, try for a ton of carbon per acre on well-managed land. And over here, we'll try for 2 tons. And Greg Judy's done grazing in Missouri and done much more than that. You know, how many people have gone out to Greg Judy's farm and see how much carbon he's putting down? The scientists say, well, if you give me a lot of money, I'll do it, you know. but he's gaining inches of soil every decade. It's a lot of carbon. The forest's the same way. So now, but the big news here is what we're learning about wetlands. If we could take 10% of this land and turn it back into wetlands the way it was when, Columbus got here, look at that number over there, 8 tons per acre per year. And I think that's a pretty, I think these are rather conservative in my mind. Stephen Effelbaum's looked at this in Wisconsin and other places. I'm going dry here. But
Like the country.
I'm desiccating. We're in the desiccation age. But look at how these, if you could take 10% of that 20 billion acres and turn it into wetlands. Now I'll give you an example. A California almond farmer trying to grow trees is saying, yeah, I got a real big problem. And I say, well, could you turn 10% of your land into beaver wetlands and raise the water table? And he says, well, then I'd lose 10% of my trees. And I just say, well, this is a couple of years ago. I says, how many are you losing now? And that's the question. So look what we've got there. Is this feasible? Well, look what we've got. 52 gigatons. We needed 25. I've got another one where, say, if we start thinking about living shorelines, the ocean now has so much energy in it that a lot of Greenland is going to melt and a lot of Antarctica is going to melt, no matter how fast we do this. And are we going to build a wall along the whole East Coast and make sure that these cities, could we spend the gross national product 2 or 3 times and save Miami and save Boston, where I live, Or are we going to let the water come in a lot of places and create mangroves in Carolina because it's getting warmer, corals in Cape Cod? There's corals there now, but if it got warmer. And what it needs to do this out there is it needs incredibly clean water coming from the land, which is another problem. The other thing is that because the Arctic is such a deal right now, what can we learn about the Arctic? Now I haven't done a lot here, because this is something we're just starting to learn about. But let's go to another picture. How fast could we step this up? Well, the goal is the kids meet in 2061 to see Halley's Comet. And they're ready to go to work. A lot of the kids are. Look here, we haven't changed the fossil fuels. This is by decade. But what if we started building the amount that the land can take in and start burping out some of the ocean CO2? And here's the total. This is a decade total. This is the ppm for the decade. And look where we get. This is nowhere near as, as fast at the beginning as it is towards the end. But 295, then we've got a big decision to make. In another decade, we could be back to Ice Age. So we've got to have a meeting and have a party, watch the comet and think, what is the goal? 300, 200, 260? How many vote for? So that's the scenario. That's the thing we're trying to build, some people thinking about. A lot of kids would like to do this kind of work, but we've got them stuck on flat screens, or we've got them, getting college degrees and not getting, a whole lot to do. There's an infinite amount of work to do, and I just think this would be fun. So I drew this picture 10 years ago. I thought some of the Harvard people would come up and say where it was wrong. I believe it a lot more now than I did then. This is kind of from the Ellen Savory stuff. But here we've got the fungi getting a lot of the glycoproteins and building structure, which you saw pictures of. And, we used to think in Texas that the dung beetles were the key. Before they started using antibiotics on animals and they started using insecticides, there were dung beetles virtually everywhere. So dung beetles they had a hard time living in the permafrost, but you can see they're pretty much everywhere else. How many dung beetles have you seen working here? And you say, well, what do the dung beetles need? Well, they need a lot of poop on the land is what they need, and then they'll bury it for you. Tons and tons of stuff. So that's the one model, and that's about 10 gigatons. This was in Washington, this display. This is the soil line. This is your turf grass, your Kentucky bluegrass. See how much, this is why you have to water it all the time and why you're adding all the chemicals. This is why you're killing your streams, you know. But I really like bleak blue stem, which the cows really love it too. So we might be able to rethink a lot of things. And then let's see, we got the time guy over here. What else can we show? How many dung beetles? One buffalo could probably support 10,000 dung beetles. A lot of tonnage of poop going down. And here we've got 876,000 tons of dung deposited every year for free, and it was all buried. Think about how much money we spend. I used to work in the chemical industry. This is silly to spend our tax money to help farmers buy chemicals so that all the money can go back to Houston or Germany or whatever. So, but the big number here, I think, 4 hooves, every square foot of the West was hit by 4 hooves a year. And they've got the reason they have those hooves is so they can cut through. This is your infiltration. If you were trying to become a flood, if you were a raindrop landing in West Texas, you could never become a flood because you would never meet anybody else. You would be down in the ground. You'd be raising the water table. So that's one story. But another story is, I'd like to ask, this is a rainfall map of the United States. Here's the 100th meridian, the 20-inch line. Where do you think this wouldn't work? What's like the driest place? A lot of the kids say Nevada. And we're going to go right here where there's get about 8 inches of rain a year. And this is Susie Creek. And this particular year they had virtually no rain in the summertime. This was last year. And by September, this is how much water they had. This is the water that came down from the mountains. It's snow in the wintertime and then it runs down. And the beaver had stopped it. And Susie Creek is kind of, I think that's, of all the places I want to see, that's maybe my happiest choice. Here's where the beaver used to be in California. They've been trapping them out because they want the water to get to the dam so they can send it to Los Angeles. But what if they built up the water reservoirs all upstream, you know? And so there's the build a wall. But I think maybe we got 1 minute here. Oh my gosh. There's something in a persistent drive to bring the water back. What is this clue to our own survival as a species? And whether we take the time to learn from other species depends on our own adaptability and willingness to see the world and the resources within us in a new light. And you say, well, what about Asia? Well, there used to be beaver all over Asia. And beaver were trapped out in Asia about 1200. And nobody remembers. But Asia's drying out too, and that's where most of the land is. That's where most of the opportunity is. And then here's Michael Kravchuk trying to slow down the water in Slovakia, and I don't know how that guy's standing up on top of there pounding. This is acrobatic arts here. But when you see a cut in the woods like this, that means the water table has to drop to where the bottom of that cut is. It'll just drain out until it gets down there. If you want to raise the table, that's when you need something to stop it. So they're trying to stop it with people, which is fine. But what if beaver came back to Slovakia in big numbers? You know? And so... And then, oh, shoot. I'm trying to say if there's... Does anybody know where this might be? You've got otters, you've got wolves, you've got moose, you've got those crazy wild horses from Poland that I can't pronounce. Anybody know the name of the Polish horses? Przewalski, yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like the French, I guess. Does anybody know where this might be? Look in the background here. It's Chernobyl. 30 years after, the last time Halley's Comet went over, it was not happy because it saw the Chernobyl thing. But look what nature's done with it because the beaver came back. This could be Asia again. And the more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe around us, the less taste we shall have for our own destruction. I kind of edited that. So we're putting together a course of people. If people are curious about that, we're going to teach this. We've got a lot of information, as you can see. And I'll just go with that. Thank you.